Hello, thank you for listening to A Glimpse of the Kingdom. I'm David Pendergrass, and I have my two very special guests back on, my brother Stephen and our brother in Christ, Mark. Why don't you say hello to the audience, Stephen and Mark?
Hello there. Thanks for having us.
How y'all doing? It's Mark.
So you've been watching the news lately?
Yeah, I've been watching quite a bit of the news lately. Trump won the elections, and we all see the aftermath.
Yeah, so what do y'all think about all these riots and things going on?
Well, first of all, I'm surprised at how they all were predicting that if Trump lost, that all his people would riot. And that kind of gave it the idea that, that would never happen if Hillary, lost. It would never be that way. And then when she did end up losing, now all the Trump protesters are out in full force. People can't go to schools. To me, it's kind of absurd because no matter what, he was elected. He is our president. We still have to stand behind him. And all the protests are not making any progress towards anything. And from my side,
Yeah. One of the things I keep thinking about is how should I respond? How would I respond if I were in their shoes? Now, I'm not in love with Trump or anything like that. If Hillary would have won, there's a lot of things about her policies that I don't agree with at all. But I know I wouldn't be out in the street rioting. So I've been trying to figure out why they're rioting. Like, what are they trying to get out of it? Are most of them just venting, or are they thinking that this is actually going to affect some sort of real change? I know Michael Moore has mentioned that, he wants to lead, protests that'll make the Occupy Wall Street look trivial, or he said something like that. What I keep wondering, though, is this actually a good thing overall, just to let people vent, or is this just sort of going to incite more violence, or more people are going to get upset? And finally, I was talking with my wife about it, and I was thinking the age-old question: what would Jesus do? Like, what should we do as Christians? I would really like to know, David, what your thoughts are on that. How do we engage people who would want to pull us into political arguments that really can never be won? Both sides are kind of set in stone. Like, what do we do from here? That's what's been bothering me.
Man, me too. I've been really bothered. I do understand the role and the need to vent when people are surprised and to process the emotions and so forth. Well, I also concur with y'all both. I don't understand what possible benefit there is in this kind of government, unless we're trying to overthrow the government. I was going to say killing cars, but destroying police cars, robbing stores. I see these videos of people who are dragged out of their cars, random people dragged out of the cars and beaten up.
Right.
Now, that's not about protesting Trump. That's a kind of hatred that is evil. It's despicable and pathetic and horrible and childish, and it should be called that. And I do think there's some moral culpability on Trump for the kinds of things he said during the campaign that I think for a lot of people felt more permission to behave that way. Obviously, it's not his fault they are doing it, but I think the sense of almost moral permission is very unfortunate. And I think that stuff I think it should be addressed morally. It should be addressed. It should be addressed to the nation. I mean, he doesn't mind tweeting everybody about all the horrible things people are and they're losers and this and that. I wish that this would be the time to be presidential to tweet out all the stuff of how they should stop and knock it off and stop drawing swastikas on there and saying, make America white again and all this stuff and let's kill the Muslims. I mean, that stuff, it'd be a good time for leadership to say, knock it off. But also, of course, you would have to say, I apologize for any contribution I made to that. So it's bothered me that there's some things he said that I think gave people moral permission. And secondly, I guess it still bothers me that people think in America that's how we protest things. That's just not how we do it. And yeah. It seemed to me that's not how we do it. But Stephen, I was thinking about, go ahead.
I agree with what you're saying, but I think on a broader scale, as far as how leadership is, I think that the leadership, including Trump, Obama, and Hillary, should all come together at this time and start saying, hey, guys, this is not how we want our country to respond to elections. Yeah. We're much better than this. We're declining at a very rapid rate if we're going to put ourselves out there in such a manner over an election.
Yeah.
This is our democracy that you're putting down. You're not just putting down Trump. You're putting down everything that America stands for when you're sitting out there rioting.
Yeah.
And, Obama hasn't stepped up and tried to stop it. Hillary hasn't done anything to try to stop it. Trump hasn't tried to stop it, And these are our leaders that need to really get together and prove that they're on America's side right now and say, hey, let's kind of tone it down a bit. We're angry, we're upset, we're shocked. That's all right. You could be that. When you start hurting other people, that's when we have to say you can't do that. You can no longer do that.
Yeah, and I was watching a live YouTube feed a couple nights ago, and they were protesting, and there were only about 2,000 people. I forget where they were, maybe Chicago or New York. And but there was a sign up that one of the cameras kept pointing to, and it was really big letters. It said "Assassinate Trump," and man, that's pretty severe. And they were screaming and chanting. But one thing I did find interesting was that the camera from the ground made it look like the whole city was overrun by protesters. And then they cut to a shot. I'm guessing it was like a GoPro attached to one of those drones. And they looked down, and then that's when you could tell it was just on like a couple blocks, and the rest of the city around it, everything was going on as business as usual. So yeah, the things people are saying is getting really nasty. But I also wonder if overall, like you were talking about on a broader scale, Mark, it would be great if the three of them said that. But I also wonder, too, how much of this is just being hyped up because it's great click magnet material for journalists. I did a rough calculation to illustrate my point. I typed in the number of protesters there have been so far. Let's say there's been 20,000. If you divide that by, 300 million people in the States, it's like 0.00000, 1% of the population that are actually out there doing this kind of stuff. But the media, if they keep, glorifying it and just that's all they talk about, and then the leaders don't step up, like what you're saying, Mark, to tone it down, it seems like it could get out of hand, even if it is small right now, because it's pretty nasty.
Yeah. I think this very similar thing, I guess, but also think about, even though it is a small percentage, the damage they're doing is so bad. I was thinking the gravitas, the gravity of what they're doing. I know some students here who go to KU who are genuinely scared. Muslims have been threatened. They've been spray painting things on the walls. I mean, there's just been a lot of horrible things. And I know they represent, a small percentage of the population here, but I mean, they're genuinely scared. And I don't think a tweet from Trump solves it all, but I do think that being more deliberate and proactive about what's going on would be very necessary. I'm also nervous about, I'm going to go back to your thing here in a second, Stephen. You were talking about what would Jesus do? And before I say that, I was thinking, politically speaking, I don't talk much about politics because I guess, frankly, I don't care that much. As a Christian, my allegiance is so much to Jesus. But though I'm certainly an American and I'm proud of that. But I'm scared of the precedents this sets. And this is what we're seeing now the last few times. If a person gets shot and they should not get shot when they don't deserve it and so forth, but then there's constant riots. Now the election happens with riots. If this goes on for a couple of weeks, what's going to happen next time? It just sets a precedent that I'm concerned will harm the future. It'll harm. How many police officers now are in more danger? How many people are going to be hurt all because it's just a precedent. It's a dangerous precedent that I'm hoping from now on to do elections, they're either going to have, riot crowds ready. I mean, I don't know. That's precedent. But I was going on the Jesus stuff, but I don't move on. Anything else about, I don't want to cut anybody off. Mark, I think you started to say something.
No, I agree totally with what you're saying on setting the precedents. In today's society, especially with the way that media plays into just about every event that takes place, a major event, I should say, but they put it out there, and people do want to one-up it. In my opinion, they want to one-up it each time. So when you allow it to go by, like the rioting after Katrina, where the people had gone out and just looted for, I guess that's a better word for it, after Katrina. They looted everything, stole TVs and everything like that. Then Ferguson, they rioted. Same thing. They were, stealing and hurting people and setting fire to things. And now we got the riots, post presidential election, and it's the same thing. It's just that it has to get more grandiose. It has to get better than the last time so that their statements heard. And we can't put the spotlight on them. We can't allow the media to put the spotlight on them anymore, in my opinion. It has to tone down quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's definitely related to what I'm. My question is there anything we could do to help stifle what's going on, bring a little more peace to the conversation? I don't know if there are any similar situations, maybe from the New Testament or Old Testament, where there's some pretty good instructions on how to deal with things like this.
Yeah, I was thinking. Yeah, well, sure. I think there is. I mean, people have different views. I immediately thought, and I've been thinking this whole time. I've prayed it at my church, and I've mentioned it several times. But Matthew 5:9, that's typically called the Beatitudes, and Matthew 5:9, he says, the Greek is, "Blessed are the ones who make peace, the peacemakers, for those will be called or shall be called sons of God." And some modern translations say will be called children of God, which is fine, but I think you miss it. And if I can teach just for a second, the sons of God is almost certainly more accurate or powerful, because to be a son of God is an honorific title. In the Old and New Testament, different people, and I think even the nation of Israel, they can be called sons of God, or son of God is an honorific. Son of God, in the most average Christian mind, thinks son of God equals deity. So when Jesus is called the Son of God, like in 2 Corinthians 1:19, "For the Son of God, Jesus Christ, the one who was proclaimed among you by us," and in Acts 9:20, they proclaim Jesus in the synagogue, saying, "This man is the Son of God." So when Son of God is used of the Messiah, Jesus, people often think, oh, that means he's deity. That's exactly how they did not understand it. In the ancient world, Romans, when they spoke of Son of God, when Jews spoke of Son of God, it did not imply your deity. When a Jew said the word son of man, they would have heard something that was deity, something divine. And the Son of Man comes from Daniel 7. But Son of God was an honorific title. It's a person who had a particular special role. Well, that's really important. So when Jesus says, "Blessed are the ones who make peace, for they will be called sons of God," of course, that's just plural for they'll be called the Son of God. And it's just a very, very special VIP kind of status. Now, in the New Testament, it's almost in the New Testament, in fact, it is solely given toward, that appellation is given to Jesus. You can just look it up. Every single time Son of God that I can tell shows up, and it's only talking about Jesus, except in Matthew 5:9. In Matthew 5:9, it says you should be called the sons of God. I mean, that's very powerful to think that in the New Testament we have something Jesus, calling people that. So that's a special deal. And of course, blessed, makarioi in Greek means something like congratulations or enjoying a special advantage, things like that, or fortunate. And that's exactly, of course, we say blessed because it comes from the Latin, and beatitude comes from the Latin. And it means something like congratulations to those who make peace. You will be sons of God. And I was thinking about that, about these writers from the Christian perspective. That should be one of our chief goals. We should, of course, love our enemies. That's Luke 6. We should love our enemies and do good to those who hate us or persecute us. And so those who do persecute us, we're supposed to love them. And there in Luke 6, to love them means to do good to them, good for them. It doesn't mean at all we have to like them. It doesn't mean to have warm, fuzzy feelings. It just means you do good toward them. So biblically speaking, I would think that's got to be, it seems to me, one of the main things we need to learn from Jesus is that that's what we're about. And you cannot be beating up police cars and so forth and call yourself a peacemaker. And that's quite different from the people who protest, who do, in fact, are silent, or they walk and they just have their signs. That's right. So it's, of course, I'm not at all implying, I don't think y'all are either, but I'm not implying that all of them are all the same. You can still make peace in peaceful ways, like Martin Luther King Jr. did. No one has to get killed. Those are protests. I think now what we have are just riots. Protests accomplish things. They were peaceful. Anyway, that's a different issue. I was
more about intimidation than, making a statement. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm sure there are people who certainly try to intimidate. In my counseling side, what I tend to think about is the person who deals with high anxiety, high trauma. And so I'm not exactly sure what groups can do to calm down whole groups besides having leaders do this right now and have them break up in communities in which this is happening and have counselors go out there. Because I have crisis counselors, like after Katrina 9/11. Some of my professors were on the kind of call list for crisis counseling. So they're all over the country. They could be called out to break up in groups to process their grieving and so forth. If it's that bad, particularly those who genuinely are afraid, like the ones who are the Muslims who are being threatened, and people who are, I mean, these are genuine threats, and people have a right to be scared. That's different from just being scared because necessarily Trump's in the office. That is what might happen. There are people who really are in danger, getting beat up, dragged out of the cars. One-on-one, I was thinking the Christian response is to help people process that trauma well. And this is nothing novel whatsoever. Anybody in counseling will tell you, I mean, the same stuff, but it's still true. That is, the two main things. One is to listen to their pain, to validate that. So if someone's in front of me and they're screaming and yelling, well, I think the problem is, and they're just getting at it, what we do not do is create more anxiety. So we should be what they call a non-anxious presence. And telling someone to calm down doesn't really calm a person down. What calms a person down is you being calm. So ideally, if we find a person is very upset, the Christian thing is to be a peacemaker, I would say, is we are calm ourselves. And that's the first thing, is that we calm, we listen, and we validate their feelings. You sound upset. You sound so yep. And then the second major thing is to try to solve the problem if it's possible. And so if a person is real upset, we say, okay, what's exactly the problem? And if there's a legitimate need, like I'm scared for my life because my neighbor just got beat up, well, then we address the problem. If it's not, then we try to find some way to help them feel like they can make a difference. Most people who freak out, psychologically speaking, when they freak out, it's because they feel like they're in a helpless state. They're being victimized. Right. And so if we can really readjust the brain, because that happens, the limbic part of the brain, the part that's survival, the run, fight or flight kind of mechanism, it's so high, we have to validate first to calm it down. And secondly, we kind of reprogram it by having them think about problem solving. So what can you do? How can you make a different outcome next time? Or what can you do to be a peacemaker? And you switch it from that limbic part of the brain to the prefrontal cortex. And I've done that, in counseling or church work or non-church work, when people are very, very, very angry, they're screaming and hollering, taking a deep breath and praying and doing those two steps helps a lot. That's what I would think.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. I worked telephone counseling referral hotline before.
Oh.
And that's what they told us, is just to kind of, refocus them, show them how they can basically regain control of the situation that they're in. And if not, point them to the direction where they can get help. You don't have to cave in and, get on their side and say, yeah, everybody's against you or whatever.
Right.
You just listen to them.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And,
that's right. And to be clear, and I appreciate you saying it, just to say real quickly, to validate their pain does not mean you validate their point of view.
Exactly.
That's very different. Yeah. It sounds like you're upset, you're angry, you're sad. I hear a lot of anger in your voice. I'm sorry that you're angry. I'm sorry that you're upset. Yeah, it's very different from, they are sorry sons of guns. And I agree with you. I'd be mad if
Yeah. And don't be afraid of being wrong when you're trying to evaluate how they feel. Or if you go and paraphrase back to them, it sounds to me like you're really upset over XXX. They'll tell you if they're wrong. If you're wrong,
that's right.
They'll say, hey, no, that's not how I feel. But it also throws the control back into their court, because they're going to say how they feel. And you can say, oh, okay, I hear now that you feel. And they're like, yeah. So, but I agree 100% with what you were saying. It's you have to listen and respond accordingly. To sum it up easily,
the preacher at the church I go to, I've enjoyed his take on the elections. He never picked a side. All he said was, come November 9th, God is still God in charge. So we don't want to put too much of our concern into who the next president's going to be, like what you said, David. And then today he took a couple minutes out to say, we really need to pray for our country. We need peace and things like that, which is great, because I know the temptation would be easy to turn it into a political thing and make some jabs at other people. So I have appreciated him doing that, but every time he brought it up in church about praying for the country, I believe in the power of prayer, but I also believe that, God works through us. David, you can talk more about that. What does that mean exactly in a situation like that? So that was really the biggest question I've had all along, is what can I do, on a daily basis to help calm things down. Is there anything I can do? Is it mostly, political leaders? Can church leaders do anything, or can just regular Christian people like me do something,
Right.
That's very interesting because it kind of rolls into maybe a little different subject, but there were people that were praying for a different outcome. So what do you do when God doesn't answer your prayers to the way you wanted them? What's the right way to respond?
Yeah, on the radio the other day, I heard a woman say that she was convinced that God had ordained completely Donald Trump and Pence, and this is exactly what he wanted, and this is exactly what's happening in the end of time. This is evidence of the end days. Like, everything is happening exactly how God had planned it. And a strict kind of Calvinist determinist would, well, not even be strict. I mean, you have to be a certain kind of Calvinist to think that it's exactly what God wanted. It's different from saying God planned is different from God caused it. Well, that's a different issue. But yeah, there are people who certainly believe that. And I'm not trying to laugh at it. I'm laughing because I don't think that way. I guess I never really thought that I never prayed that God would elect a certain person. So I hadn't thought that way before. But it seems to me, Mark, what we'd say is if the person prayed, I want Clinton to win, and Clinton didn't win, the answer is that God said no.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I totally agree. But how do people process that? I mean, and it's not just with the election, of course, like what do you do when your prayers aren't answered to the way that you're liking? I mean, I've trying to defend the faith. That's one of the things that, non-Christians have asked me. Well, does God answer all your prayers? No. No, he doesn't,
Right.
And
right.
How does that make you feel? Doesn't bother me, I know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's interesting too, because I know there had to have been millions of Christians who prayed a lot that Hillary would be elected. And there had to have been millions that prayed that Trump would be elected. And it kind of reminds me of the athletes, the team that wins. I just got to thank Jesus, or God. He was really on my side in this win. And of course, it begs the question: well, what about the other guy? Like, does God really cause certain things to happen in those arenas, figuratively and literally?
Yeah,
sports arenas and political arenas.
I certainly think, based on numerous biblical texts, that God does in fact care about who He's elected. God does care about it because I think it's a thing that affects humans. I think He cares about everything. I think God cannot not care. I mean, I think being all good, He does care what happens. Being all sovereign, He certainly oversees the whole show. Then the issue is, to what degree does God cause the election? Just because God knows what happened does not mean that He caused the election to go that way. Now, there are different Christian views on this. You can take the kind that He did deliberately cause, like the woman on the radio show. You can take a Molinist or middle knowledge approach. You can take a kind of a hands-off approach and say God just knew, but He didn't cause it whatsoever. There's different ways to look at it. My own view is that God does not cause people to do a certain thing. I think He inspires them. I think the Spirit gives humans advice. God gives us advice. And like any advice that we ever receive, we can say no or say yes. Mm-hmm. And so when I ask God to give the leaders of this country wisdom, what I'm asking for is God to give them advice. And I also pray for them and say, and the courage to follow it. And the wisdom to know that they're receiving advice from God. And that's the best I know to do. And much like I can ask God to give my children the same kind of wisdom and say, please help them know when their parents are speaking truth and love and help them obey or something. But that's it. I mean, I do not believe for a second God overwhelms them and they lose the capacity of a genuine free will. I don't think He does that. I think that God very much can and does, on a very rare occasion, do something special we'll call a miracle, and He reveals Himself in a brand new way. But then, even then, my view is that He still does not override their free will. It's just He exposes them to something which their will now can make a decision about in a way it could not make before. So, for example, the Apostle Paul knew who Jesus of Nazareth was. Probably not in his earthly life, probably not, but he certainly knew of the name because he persecuted the followers. but he chose not to follow this Jesus guy, almost certainly because he was crucified, and Messiahs don't get killed, and they're cursed, according to Deuteronomy. But then he meets Jesus. Well, Jesus did not overwhelm his will, I don't think. I think now Paul met the guy and realized, not just meet him, he's alive and well, and I was dead wrong. Now, having said that, I think it's the same thing with the government. So when I pray for that, I pray the government leaders do have wisdom, but it doesn't mean for a second they can say no. They can say no. They could say no nonstop and say no just like as much as I can. I pray that God gives me wisdom, and I inadvertently and sometimes maybe deliberately say no to it. That advice in my mind that says, you ought to, but. I know I ought to, or I know I ought not to, but. It's the but is my own will. And that's the very thing that I asked the Lord Jesus to help me with when he said, to be my disciple, you must deny your will, pick up your cross, and follow me. And so Christians should be defined by how much they do not have a will anymore. And I know some people find that cheesy, and I'm okay with cheesy sometimes, and I'll say this to people, and they'll say, well, David, what's your view on X, Y, Z, whatever the ethical issue is? And I'll say, I don't mean to be cheesy, but I don't have a will in this. Jesus said this, therefore I do what he said. That's it. If I were making this up, I would not have come to the same conclusion. If I were making it up, I would not say divorce was wrong, but Jesus says it's not what we're supposed to do. Okay, well, Jesus, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I agree totally with what you just said. It's it's not a causative agent per se for our prayers. It's left up to our will and our ability to submit to His wisdom and His will.
I think it's a big deal that we Christians think clearly about what we're saying when we say the words, I'm praying for you, or I'm praying for them. I think it's a big deal. I think, and I've talked a lot about prayer in different sermons and blogs and podcasts or whatever, but I've done several things, but I just think it's a big deal. I think a lot of people's confusion, I think a significant portion of people leave the faith, studies demonstrate, because prayer was not answered the way they wanted. And part of it's the problem, of course, of spiritual, I call them quote unquote spiritual religious leaders, preachers, teachers. They use it in such a way to make it sound like magic. And that's something Jesus was adamant that it was not. It was not. And that's exactly why he says, don't pray like the Gentiles or the pagans do, the nations do, who heap up empty phrases. Instead, pray like this. And that's his view. In Luke's version, the disciples asked Jesus, hey, teach us a prayer. John the Baptizer taught his disciples a prayer. Why don't you teach us one? But in Matthew, it's to fight against using senseless words that try to heap up false nonsense, because that's what pagans do. They have to say the right incantation or the gods will be offended and not answer it. And Jesus is saying that's not who your Heavenly Father is like. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, that's a big word to say a lot, but in my experience it is a lot. A lot of Christians think it is that way. And so there's a very childish response when God says no. And I find this especially true amongst skeptics and atheists when they talk about prayer and prayer didn't work. Well, studies demonstrate 48% of the time or 68% of the time it's no, and what difference does that make? That kind of stuff, I just don't find that compelling. I hear what they're saying. I don't find that compelling. I don't know what percentage. As a parent, how many parents answer more than 50% of the time what their children ask? How many times do parents say the word no? And when they're really young, I bet 80, 90% of what we say is no. No, you can't bite your sister. No, you can't have more toys. No, you can't eat more sugar. No, no, no. Now, if I just look at the stats alone, if I were an atheist, that would mean the parent doesn't exist. I must not exist because I said the word no so much. If they did an analysis and put it in a laboratory and released it in a Duke journal, that's silly to me. The degree to which I say yes to my children does not demonstrate my existence or my lack of existence, nor does it demonstrate if I am good or evil. The only way to know that is to find out why it is I said no to the things to which I said no. And the only way to know that is to ask me. Well, that's what Christians say about God. We say when we read the scriptures, you learn that God is good by nature. Jesus says it this way. How many of you would give your child a snake if they asked for bread? Or stones if they asked for fish? Those kind of things. How many of you do? Well, you wouldn't. Well, your Heavenly Father's that way. He's not a mean God. He's not a punk. So if he says no to you, he's not going to give you the wrong junk. And so I get frustrated that atheists and skeptics use it as ammunition against Christianity. I get frustrated at Christian leaders who should know better. I get sad for Christians who abandon the faith or are teeter-tottering back and forth because they have a very different understanding of prayer and prayer requests that Jesus taught us.
It's really interesting to hear you say that. I forget what I was watching or reading, and essentially they said that the old argument that God, essentially, a lot of skeptics or people that leave the faith, and I was one of them for a while. We say if God is all good and all powerful, there's no way He would have allowed that to happen. And the argument against that is, but just because you can't come up with a reason doesn't mean there isn't a reason. And that really stuck with me. And hearing you say that is just more validation. I love the parent-child analogy, because there are so many things we have to tell our children no about. And I know they don't get it. But it has nothing to do with how much I love them.
Nope.
At all. And when you talk about a parent and a child, that's really complex. But when you think about a personal being who created the entire universe, there's no way we can begin to wrap our brains around something like that. There's just no way. I heard a guy one time say that, there couldn't be a God because what about all the, 5 million children that die each day? And, the other one is, well, if we're really that important, how come we're not the center of the universe? Or how come, this, that? And I always want to ask, how many universes have you created? I mean, really, not being hateful or anything. I mean that. Like, how do you know what you're talking about? Because I've never created a universe. I have no idea why things are the way they are. But I think the evidence is overwhelmingly in favor of there being a personal God, and that Jesus was who He said He was, and that just makes the most sense. So I have a lot of questions. Why on earth, did I have a close friend that died at a young age? Why did my parents get divorced? Why? Why? I have a lot of questions, but even though that's true, I still think the evidence points that it does exist, and I really don't know what my point is other than I like what you're saying.
And thank you for that. I was going to say, first off, to correct myself, I was thinking two things. One is to correct myself. I gave the wrong analogy. In Matthew 7, 9, and 10, Jesus says, is there anyone among you who, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? I said bread and snake. But anyway, in verse 10, or if he asks for a fish, we'll give him a snake. So I got my other thing. But the point is still the same. The point is he doesn't do that. He says, even verse 11, Jesus says, if you then, although you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask Him? And that's because He is good. But if you're outside of the family of faith, if you're outside of being a disciple of Jesus, that is not compelling to you because you don't trust Him. I imagine, of course, Stephen, you have two boys. Imagine those boys are sitting around talking to other boys and chatting, and they go, man, I heard your dad said no 94% of the time, the first 4 years of your life, 3 years of your life, man. I don't think He exists. Oh, of course He exists. Where do you think He come from? Or He must be a real villain. And the kids go, no, He's good. And they say, no, explain this to me. Why did He say no? Here. And he goes, I don't have an explanation. Well, that's my point. He's evil. He's rotten. He's a dumb God. Either look, here's the deal. Either He's good or He's not. And that kind of nonsense. Yep. The point is, they would say, I know enough about my dad to trust Him. And that's why with skeptics and atheists, I don't start with a problem of suffering and pain. And I'll tell them that. They ask the question. I'll say, there are very good answers for that. I'm happy to discuss it. But I need to tell you that I typically don't start here because I'm starting from, I trust Him and know Him more than you do, which means some of this is going to resonate much easier for me than it is you. That's the first thing, to correct myself, and then the second is that. The third thing I'd say is, I was thinking about the notion of how many people have died. You're talking about starving babies and stuff like that. It's exactly right. I've thought about a lot like that lately. And one thing I'd say is, this doesn't make it all right. It doesn't, okay. But this one website shows us there's 1.4 billion abortions since 1980 worldwide. By Planned Parenthood since 1970, 7.2 million. Black babies since 1973 in the U.S. alone, black babies, 17.859 million. And so we're killing off way more people than starvation. The number one most dangerous spot, this is studies, the number one most dangerous spot on the earth, is in a womb. The last statistic I read that 7 out of 10 black babies are aborted. Planned Parenthood was started because of eugenics. Anyway, I've gone for a long time. The point is, that's so terribly sad. I wasn't thinking about that the other day. When I was thinking about this issue of the sickness and death and so forth, and it hit a moment. I like analogies. And by the way, when I give an analogy like parent to child, I'm not making an argument by analogy. I'm saying the biblical text, I could take you to Job or 2 Esdras, which is a Christian document. There's several documents that speak about God's infinite wisdom and not being able to explain to us all that we go through. So there's biblical examples for that. And so I'm just giving an analogy to prove the same point, but I'm not making an argument based on analogy. But to give you another analogy for something else that's not an argument for it, but it does, I think, manifest or exemplify a biblical principle. And the bottom line is, it's this. It's our job description. When someone gets really, really ticked off that there are people who are dying, if God were good, why didn't he fix all the starving children? That is just asking the CEO of Payless, why didn't he do my exchange on my shoes in the store? If he were good, he'd show up right now and make my... Oh, what is the analogy? The point is, it's not a job description. Now, what I mean by that is, the Bible is consistent on this point. God designed it. This is a footnote here, because sometimes I get so frustrated about this. The biblical picture of God is unlike the other understandings of God in the ancient world. It is very, very different. The other cosmogonies are early stories of how Earth came to be and what the purpose of the gods were and the purpose of humans are very distinct from what Jews said. Other religions, Canaanite, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, they had similar features. I'm not going there right now, maybe we can do another podcast on that. But what Jews are very different is that God created humans on Earth, and that this is another thing Christians should stop saying. They were not designed to serve God. That is God, because God has no needs. Adam and Eve, it never says they were the first humans. It never says that. It says he created them, and then he makes Adam and Eve in Genesis 2. But these particular humans were created to till and take care of what was called the garden. And all ancient monarchs or kings had a garden nearby. So their role was to take care of the garden. Well, the benefit of taking care of the garden is that they're near the king. And in the biblical picture, God, of course, is king over all the cosmos, which is why he made the heavens and the earth. It's his cosmos. But in any case, they're not there to serve food or water or anything for Yahweh. But in other creation cosmology stories, that's exactly what they were for there. They were there to serve the gods. They created humans to serve them. But that's not what we do today. We don't serve God. So people say Christians should serve God. Literally, we do not. No more than I don't serve the Payless customer, the normal store doesn't serve the CEO. But instead what they do is they serve the ways or the commands or the infrastructure that the CEO wants. And my point of that is, so what God designed humans to perform a certain job description. And it's our job, and it says this, to be the image of God means, it says specifically, that's to take over and care for the earth and rule over it and subdue it. Our job is to rule over the earth, take care of it. Now, based on the Old Testament laws, and then of course through Jesus, he says this over and over and over, and all through the New Testament, the number one ethic we should have to each other is love. So we care for our neighbor, we care for our enemy, we take care of their needs. We find this in Acts chapter 2, Acts chapter 4, when it says that there was no needy one among them because they were united in spirit, mind and body and spirit. They were united together. The point is, the Christians Christians understand it. They're supposed to understand it, that humans have the job description to take care of the poor and needy. And that's why I mentioned this in my book. If we spent the much money, we've spent over $1 trillion in 1 year on entertainment alone. It would take just a few $1 billion to pay for all the poor. We could hire, I don't know, we could go. The point is, it's our job description. So when people get so angry at God for not doing the thing that humans are supposed to do, it's might say ironic, or at least hypocritical or confused. They should be mad at themselves. How much have they done to help the orphan? And the Christian response, and I'll say this last thing and get off my pedestal here. The Christian response is God cares for all of them. God cares for the starving Africans. He cares for the starving Americans. He cares for them. He loves them. He cares and loves them so much that he designed humans to care for their goods. To care for their good. That's the whole reason we're designed to. That's why Jesus showed that. We're supposed to care for the good. It's in our job description to do it. It's not in his job description. when he does care for their good in full, that will be the end of all time. And when that happens, we will no longer have the moral responsibility for our neighbor that we have now. And that is crucial. Having moral responsibility for our neighbors now forms our character. It lets us see whose side we're on. And on and on. It allows us to build genuine love and hate genuinely what is evil. Paul said that to abhor what is evil, to love and cling to what is good. So it's our job description to make sure that we're feeding the hungry, we're doing this right, and that God inspires His people. And it's the church who does it. Churches started orphanages. Churches started hospitals. And that's one of the best and one of the worst things that ever happened is when Christianity became the legal religion. And when that happened, of course, they were the ones who started orphanages, all these things, and now the state takes over and starts building orphanages, and so, which is great. But now that they have an enormous amount of other ways to give, the church has greatly reduced the degree to which it is that light to the nations.
Wow, it had me thinking just then. What would the world look like if I forget how many Christians there are in the world. It's over 1 billion, right?
Well, if you include Mormons and everybody, it's about 2.5 billion.
Yeah. So if all Christians were to make it their top priority to carry out those duties, taking care of the poor, showing more patience, et cetera, like really getting out and serving.
Absolutely.
10 hours a week, what would the world look like in a year?
Absolutely.
And I know Christians in churches already do a lot. There's no doubt. It's hard to believe that we're all doing what we could be doing. When you look at the state of the world in terms of the amount of suffering and things like that, I really think we could do a lot more. It seems that way.
I think so too. And I'll say this last quick thing. I think so too. And of course, remember, not everyone is a Christian. So even if we had 5 billion people, we still got 3 billion people who are not. And that includes drug lords and warlords in Africa who block relief and food and oppress people. And that's the point, is that they're not acting according to God's design. They have evil, they're completely living outside of God's design. And because of that, it causes harm. It causes, even though there were famines, I know that stuff, but if they were surrounded by Christians, the church we have a supply chain set up, it would take care of all the needs.
Well, speaking of drug cartels, I was talking with my wife earlier about this. I thought, what if all the Christians in the U.S. that do drugs, buy drugs, whether they're in college or older, didn't? It seems like that would there have to be millions of people that call themselves Christians that buy illegal drugs.
That's true.
Right? I mean, just statistically.
That's true.
So there would be a lot less murder in, say, Mexico or Colombia if people were doing what they were supposed to do as a Christian.
Mark's using it right now. I mean, it's pervasive.
I am. Yeah.
And we didn't want to do this on air, Mark, but
this really is the purpose of the podcast.
I shut down on intervention. That word shuts me down.
That word shuts you down.
Yes. Just to kind of recap, though, I mean, if we want to tie this all back into the rioting and how we should respond, basically, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, it seems like it should be the humanistic virtue to be able to look out for your brother and not want to do any harm to anybody else, because you would never want it to circle back around to you. So if we are our brother's keeper, then we shouldn't be out there rioting because something didn't turn out the way we want it to. We need to make it work to the benefit of the whole. I know that's a bit altruistic, but nonetheless.
No. I mean, of course, technically it's not altruistic at all, because like you just said, you do it so that it might not happen to you. In other words, it is selfish. It's the opposite of altruistic. It's narcissist. But that's exactly, if you're not a Christian, it just seems to me there's no way around that. That is, and this, of course, C.S. Lewis noticed this a long time. It's been noticed for a long time, but he says it perfectly in Mere Christianity. What you just mentioned, that is, now this is a different subject, but it's on the subject. That is, we should be good. He says, but yeah, if a person says we should, why should we? And he goes on and on, well, if we should, well, and he ends up with basically it's good for humanity because it helps you survive. He said, so the reason why we shouldn't be The reason why we should be unselfish is because we're selfish. That is for selfish reasons. And that's of course, in other words, it's not altruistic. It's for selfish reasons. But I hear what you're saying. If you're not a Christian, you said the word humane. That is what it means to be human, I guess. At minimum, can we appeal to people's self-preservation and narcissism and that stupid, silly karma nonsense that people keep saying, well, hey, because they're more likely to believe that than they are the teaching of Jesus.
True.
Yeah, maybe we can appeal that. Like with children. That's what you do with children. You appeal to their narcissism. Make it more about them.
Yep, and back to the children thing now. My parents told me no a lot. I mean, my parents got good at it. Like, I'd ask, like, partially, like, I'd be, Mom, no. I mean, a kid would just come out. I'd be walking down the hall, and both my parents would shout out a no. No. Like, what?
I thought that was your name.
No. Yeah. I was like, man, that's crazy. So I've got really good at saying no to people. Just like, even if I want something, I just automatically say no. And I go like, gosh, I really wanted that ice cream. Why did I say no?
Well,
so it's my parents' fault.
And so they did not exist.
That's the
No,
point.
my parents did not exist.
That's the ultimate
therefore,
point.
I am not here.
You're not here.
And yes, indeed.
Good job, guys. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate your time together.
Yeah, thank you for letting us be a part of this.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you'll listen more. If you want more, go to davidpendergrass.com. There are tabs at the top that let you have access to all the podcasts I've recorded, to sermons I've done, books I've written. They're all there at davidpendergrass.com. You can also check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. facebook.com/glimpse of the kingdom. And also look at my Twitter feed at glimpse the kingdom or at Dr. D. Pendergrass, at Dr. D. Pendergrass. There's tons of ways to reach out. I hope you will. Send me your questions, send me your comments. If you'd like to support the ministries of Glimpse of the Kingdom, you can also find ways to give online on davidpendergrass.com. If you'd like for me to come and do some consulting, check out my website, davidpendergrassconsulting.com, and I'll be happy to come out and speak to your organization and help and train any way I can. God bless you. See you online.